Right, I have 5:30. We've got only a couple of things on the agenda tonight, but they're big items on the agenda, so I'd like to get things started. I did get a text message from Quincy. He's going to be running a little bit late. I have not heard from Raul, but it is a study session, so we don't have to worry about having a quorum. First item is public comment. For those of you who are here who may be here to make public comment about any item on the agenda tonight, this would be your opportunity to do this. We will be discussing two separate items this evening. You will not have an alternate time to be able to make public comment, so we would ask that if you're going to make public comment, please come forward to the podium, state your name and your address, and during a study session, you have 3 minutes for public comment. So, is there anyone here who would like to address council? Oh, we would ask that you wear, do you have a mask with you?
I do.
We'd appreciate it if you would wear that. Thank you.
I won't spit at you, I promise.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that as
I'm
well.
not that type of person.
Yeah. Before you get started, I do want to make sure that the council is aware and those in the audience are aware, we are broadcasting and recording tonight's meeting. We anticipated that there may be a number of people who wanted to make public comment or who may be interested in the proceedings this evening. That is not going to be a regular practice to record and broadcast all of the study sessions. But for this one, and also for the study session that's scheduled to take place on July 8th, we will be broadcasting that one as well. So, sorry to interrupt you. Could you please state your name and address for the record, please? And I did not take any of your 3 minutes, I promise.
Okay, I'm counting. My name is Sally Jolersma. I live in Pioneer Village at 833 Millbridge. My concern with this project has been explained to me by the guys from Habitat and Jubilee. So those answers have come quite good, but I'm still very concerned about storm sewer and where is that water going to go? The property of the woods slants down towards Pioneer Village, so that could possibly become a little flooded area. And then with the snow piles of plowing the roads, where is that melted snow going to go? But I want to say thank you for working with Habitat and Jubilee. I want to say thank you to you guys too. This has been quite a project for you to go through. But I really would like to make more comments after I listen to what you have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And there won't be the opportunity for further public comment tonight, but there will be when this comes before the council during a regular meeting. All right? Anyone else who would like to make public comment this evening?
All cleaned up and ready. Cal Prenz again, 318 West 35th Street. Properties on both sides of this development, both on the east and the west side. I think I have a pretty good idea where this is going to go, but I'd really appreciate if you'd consider some security for us. I'd really like to see some fences, at least on the west and the north side of the property. I know we can put up a 4-foot fence right now, but we're certainly like to have a 6-foot fence there. So there's no sense in going through all the rest. You've got all the information, but I would appreciate if you consider that.
Right. Thank you, Cal. Anyone else who would like to address council?
Mike Orzum, 265 West 36th. Just to relate a little thing that happened yesterday on 36th Street, really has, it's relevant because of 36th Street. BPW decided that they needed to replace a fire hydrant, I guess, on the end of 36th Street. And so they pulled up in your parking lot, Mr. Cal's parking lot there, unloaded a loader, and I thought it was for Cal's, something he was doing. He's putting a new roof on over by his. And so I didn't think nothing of it, but they down to the dead end there. And there was trucks in and out all day, BPW. And I thought, God, there's all these trucks down there. And they actually blocked in one of the girls on the dead end. She could not get out her driveway. She ended up having to drive across her lawn. I don't know if she had sprinklers or anything, you know, but, nothing's even started. Beyond that, that road is not big enough to deal with what you guys want to do. 6 houses down there. Yeah, I don't think you'll find too many people are gonna complain about that, but 42, that's craziness. That is just, today, when I came here, come out to 36th Street, 4 cars in front of me on 36th Street waiting to get onto Washington. Of course, it's 5 o'clock, a little after 5. It's busiest time of the day, no doubt, you know. But you imagine that with 42 other people behind me? No, it's just, so I decided I'll just make a right-hand turn. I'm not even gonna try and turn left. I just sit there. I didn't even look behind me to see. I know there was at least 1 car behind me, but there was 4 in front of me. I'm just like, okay, you know, and it's not gonna get any better. And I've asked so many times, what are you gonna do with 36th Street? How are you gonna improve it? How are you gonna make it better? I ain't heard a word, ain't seen no plans, ain't heard nothing from nobody. So, and it's the same thing, all the other questions I had. I asked about snow removal in there, and I guess Mr. Darby is gonna take care of that, I don't know. So, but doesn't look to me, if you ever did any snow plowing, there ain't a whole lot of room to put snow. So, that's, there you go. Enough said, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Anyone else that would like to address council? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period. We did receive 1 public comment through the public comment email address that we have. So I would just like to point that out to council. It is part of the packet, and then we can't accept that into the record at this meeting, but we will do that next week at next week's meeting. But I just wanted to make sure that council was aware that that additional public comment came in. Next item on the agenda, the proposed rezoning of 285 West 36th Street and portions of 904, 906, and 926 South Washington Avenue from R1 one-family residential district to the PRD Planned Residential Development District with proposed final adoption on July 1 of 2020. Mr. Van Beek.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. So this evening, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're expecting and making the presentation to you, and then ultimately being able to answer any questions that you have and give you space to have discussion. We're going to start with Senior Planner Jenna Elswick, who will take a few minutes just to lay out the various documents and the process and the project from our perspective and staff recommendation that was involved that went to the Planning Commission. She will also be available for all the documents that were part of the packet, so that as we support any presentation or anything that you want to look at something from there, she'll be able to pull that up so you'll be able to look at that. After Jenna's done though, she's going to introduce, and then the developers from Jubilee and Habitat will be here, and they'll take probably a little bit more time really going through their proposal, what they presented to Planning Commission. And then, like I said before, then we'll make it available more for you for questions and discussion. So with that, Jenna, way back there. All right, thanks, Jenna. Also, Ron is here tonight. I know typically he's not here for study sessions, but just the nature of the discussions tonight found that it might be helpful for Ron to be here to answer any questions also.
Good evening. I'm a little short, so hopefully you can see me.
I understand.
Good evening. The intent of this presentation is, as Keith said, to provide some additional context regarding the rezoning request from R1 to PRD zone districts, as well as some more information about the site plan, which was approved by Planning Commission. First, kind of taking a step back, looking at the surrounding context and surrounding areas. You can see that site. Again, portions of 904, 906, and 926 South Washington Avenue, as well as the city-owned 285 West 36th Street on the north side of that property. Also, you can see the adjacent land uses, Pioneer Village to the north, apartment complex Harbor Village to the south, and then surrounded by residential detached single-family homes that have been established there. You could also see the different networks, street networks, which is kind of important to look at in terms of this context. Specifically 35th Street with all of that traffic outletting onto Ottawa Avenue, and then 33rd Street outletting onto South Washington Avenue primarily. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get into some more of the site plan details. Also important in this context is to take a step back, kind of review what has happened up until this point, specifically about the city-owned property at 285 West 35th Street. Sorry. Not sure why that's happening. So specifically in March of 2017, Property Review Committee was formed by City Council, the PRC, and then in January 2018, the PRC provided a recommendation report to City Council looking at the 168 city-owned properties within the city itself, because there are properties that are in the township, but these are just city-owned, city location properties. And then the PRC divided those 168 properties into 3 different categories or tiers. Tier 1 was to keep, like City Hall. That was the vast majority of those 168 properties. Tier 2 was to dispose of or to use. And then Tier 3 were catalyst projects, like JDY, something that required a much larger public outreach process. So 285 West 36th Street was determined to be in that Tier 2 category and was one of 10 properties. And then Tier 2 was further divided into those that are developable as is now and those sites that are not as developable as is. So 285 West 36th Street was then one of 3 properties that were determined to be developable as is, and the PRC recommended to disseminate an RFP so that the city could be very specific about and intentional about the types of development that they would want to see on that site. March 2019, staff obtained feedback on that RFP. April 17th, City Council determined that the site was surplus by resolution. April 30th, the RFP was disseminated. Ultimately, 3 proposals were obtained by the city. And in September of 2019, Council adopted a resolution to approve and execute the contract with Lakeshore Habitat for Humanity and Jubilee Ministries for a total amount of $138,000 with a 10% earnest deposit, which was made at that time. Officially, the applicants started their planning process in January 2020 when they had the workshop, the public outreach workshop at Herrick Library. Then between February and May, they continued their planning process. At some point within then, they contacted Dick Darby, who owns those 3 properties to the south, and made agreements with him. And then in May of 2020, the second method of public outreach occurred, and unfortunately, they were unable to have an in-person workshop because of COVID, but It was approved that they mail postcards out and provide a website and obtain feedback in that manner. May 19, they turned in their rezoning application and site plan application for Planning Commission. June 9th, approval of the site plan by Planning Commission and a recommendation to City Council for the approval of the rezoning. July 1st, as you know, is your scheduled hearing. And then should City Council approve the rezoning, the applicant is also required to come back to Planning Commission for a site condo, actually site or volume condo, so condominium approval. And they would also, of course, be required to obtain a stormwater permit through the city engineer to meet local and state standards for stormwater mitigation to keep that water on site. Whenever we obtain a rezoning request, we always look at the future land use map, which is part of our master plan, and make sure that what is being proposed is consistent with the intent of that vision of the master plan. For these sites, it was deemed to be suburban residential. Suburban residential is a mixture of different single-family housing types, not only detached homes, which is what RR1 is, but also townhomes and condominiums. If the site were to remain at R1 with the current zoning, then staff figured out that that the applicant, or a applicant, I should say, would be able to develop 20 to 25 single-family homes, and that would be on the total site, not only the city-owned property. And those homes, though, would have to be on 8,400 square foot minimum lots with 70-foot wide frontage. And then there would have to be the 66-foot street right-of-ways, which is our public street standard. Going into depth just a little bit on the site plan portion, like I had mentioned before with the RFP, the city council was very intentional about what exactly they wanted to see in a site plan. And it happens that the applicants have met all of these. Just to name a couple: development of a combination of single-family types, innovative construction materials. They're proposing modular townhouses, and then also those community courts, a pocket neighborhood, if you will. That's really the name of it. And then preserving site perimeter trees, which we can discuss a little bit more here at their site plan, which I'll just briefly talk about and then turn over to the developer to speak more on. So they're proposing two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is the city-owned property, 285 West 36th Street. So here, a total of 19 single-family units, where 9 would be detached units, and then 10 units would be townhomes in configurations of 2 and 3 unit townhome configurations. And then phase 2 would be 9 single-family homes, and then 14 townhouses, and again, in the 2-unit and 3-unit configurations. A fire access road would need to be constructed prior to the phase 2 development by fire code. They're proposing the 35-foot buffer of existing trees on the west side, and then a 30-foot buffer on the north side. And the developers can speak a little bit more to this. However, there is kind of a shortage of existing tree buffer up here, so they're also proposing to put in some new landscaping to better screen the north property line. The townhomes, like I had mentioned, are to be modular. They're providing 141 total parking spaces on site. That works out to be 3.35 spaces per dwelling unit. They also are providing some deferred parking, 14 spaces of deferred parking here and here, in case it's deemed that additional parking is needed. They are proposing that ring road around the development with street trees. In terms of snow storage, the city they worked with Brian White and his team to make sure that there would be ample amount of snow storage for 36th Street at the end here, as well as, so on the north and south of the road, as well as ample amounts of space for them to turn around to finish the 36th Street snow cleanup. And then certainly throughout the site, and the developer can speak to that more, we looked at snow storage and how that interacts with stormwater management, and that would be more of our city engineer's specialty, but certainly that's something that he looks at. A traffic study was required as part of a site plan approval, which looked at these items specifically. The result was that by the traffic engineer specialist, they said that the impact of the proposed development is minimal in terms of providing any geometric or any other changes to the actual roadway. Certainly, staff and planning commission absolutely can, know that it's not minimal when you're going from 10 to anything really above 10. And so we're certainly aware of that. But specifically, it's important to point out that the traffic study this is based on other inputs as well. And so they also looked at those nearby streets, such as 33rd Street, which I had mentioned, outlets onto South Washington, and determined, like I had said, mitigation measures aren't recommended. What they also do, which is important to note, is that they look not only at what's existing versus what's proposed, but also what would be, what could be existing without rezoning versus what is being proposed. So there you have between 20 to 25 units, right? So let's say 25 units and 42 units, and then they make that determination that it's a very marginal difference between 42 and 25 in terms of traffic generation. So I think that that's just important to be aware of. So you've seen this before. This is where we are now actually in between here and here. After the first reading, you can see that they still have quite a ways to go before they would be able to obtain a certificate of occupancy. And one thing that's not in here, which should be, is that site plan or site condo approval that would be required. With that, unless City Council has any immediate questions for staff, I would turn it over to the developer to continue.
Any questions for Jenna? Great, thanks, Jenna.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure, Dave.
Sorry. And I don't know if this is the right spot to ask. Dumb thing. Right spot to ask this question, but in considering the site plan and so forth, I mean, we've heard some questions about runoff, water control, that sort of thing. Was that considered in all of this, and what was the conclusion reached there?
Yeah, so that's where the stormwater permit comes in. So that's a separate process from planning and planning commission. That's determined just by the city engineer and his staff. So technically, I mean, I don't know the technical details per se on stormwater, but I can tell you that our stormwater ordinance is very much aligned with state control. and really making sure that that water is mitigated. Oftentimes, stormwater mitigation actually better enhances the ability to capture stormwater on site and not let it go off onto other sites than just even a natural site. So that's the extent that I, am comfortable to speak on that. But certainly that will be considered and will be mandatory.
I'll broaden the inquiry a little bit. Does anyone know if that evaluation has been done by our staff yet?
I do not believe it is. No, it has not yet.
Yeah, so procedurally, Dave, that would not be done because we wouldn't require of any developer to have that detailed plan to be done until they would get the type of approval that they're still looking to get. But our ordinance does require that a certified engineer would need to develop, yeah, I know, it's up there, right? So a certified engineer would need to meet the stormwater ordinance requirements, which Jenna did a good job of in plain language says you need to take care of the water that's produced on your site and control it on your site.
Okay.
So in the process moving forward, should this get the approvals not only of you to rezone, and again, remember your action is the rezoning action, not the site plan action, but then would get the site condo or volume condo approval from the planning commission. That's probably the point, if those approvals are given, that then the developer in any situation would hire the engineering company to do that work, and then our engineering department reviews that to confirm that, and then that's how that process would work.
I was unclear about where in the process that happened and under whose purview that fell, so that's very clear.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because then that makes it more clear for everybody that that's how that typically works.
Any other questions for Jenna?
Will we
Yeah.
have an opportunity later to ask questions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
I'd like to hear the whole thing.
All right. Great. Thank you, Jenna. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to hear us. I'm Don Wilkinson with Lakeshore Habitat for Humanity. This is Steve Gross with Jubilee Ministries. And this is just a neat opportunity for us. Lakeshore Habitat builds homes for people who make between 30 and 80% of the area median income. So imagine retail store clerk, factory worker, those type of incomes are who we serve. We've been along the lakeshore for 30 years now. We've built 153 homes. We do it with volunteer labor, so the cost of our home by the time we have everything all in is around $180,000. These homes typically appraise for $200,000. We're a little unique in the fact that we use volunteer labor. However, we have site supervisors who are fully licensed. We build to the local codes that we need to follow so that everything is built up to code. We use the trades for any licensed work that needs to be done. Habitat homeowners have to go through a very rigorous screening process in order to make sure that they can partner with Lakeshore Habitat. And then at that point, they are signing up also for they are also signing up for sweat equity, so they have ownership into their home. They actually help build their home, build other homeowners' homes, and they work in the Habitat Restore, in addition to taking financial planning classes, home maintenance classes, home ownership classes. Typically, a Lakeshore Habitat resident will live in his or her home for over 30 years. We have very few people that get their house paid for and turn around and I'm sorry, Jay? Oh, I thought you were asking a question there. Sorry about that. But typically they're in their home. They take a lot of pride in their home. And as you well know, home ownership is one of the best ways to break the cycle of generational poverty. Typically their children go on to finish high school, go on to college. We've got several success stories about how our Habitat homeowner children are now in our public schools teaching, They're working in the area, and Habitat homeowners get much more involved in the community than what a rental program works. We're pretty excited about this. If you look at the statistics for Ottawa County, there's only been 2 developers that have been building homes for less than $250,000 over the last couple of years. It's been Lakeshore Habitat and Jubilee, and that's really a need in our community for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve and let him explain a little bit about Jubilee.
Hi, everyone. Jubilee has been doing business in Holland for about 20 years. Previously, we've come to this body twice to ask for PUDs or PRDs. One is for the Midtown block, and the other is for Central Commons. And I think we can all agree that those were the right things to do for the community, and have been really very successful in every sense and measure. So we're here for a third time, and we're very excited about this partnership. Holland needs some wins. Our Holland community needs some wins with affordable and mixed income housing. We haven't had a lot of wins. And this is a great project where we can show folks how to do it and do it right. I want to back up a little bit. We're very much interested in investment in the community. And over the past 7 years, Jubilee, along with our partner HomeCore, have renovated over 50 homes. And in those 50 homes, it's increased the value, the market value from what we purchased the home for to what they were sold for by over $5 million. What was really tough about that, though, is the average transaction price is $163,000. So we've been working really hard to keep that price down and keep those houses affordable. We can't do that anymore with renovations. The cost of buying a home for a renovation is just too high. And so we need to start building new homes. And this is a great opportunity to do it. Currently, we have 5 new homes under construction with Habitat, another parcel. And we've got 6 housing units under renovation. All told, that's about a $2.5 million investment on Jubilee's part in this community because we think it's the right thing to do. And we think it's so important that we get more affordable housing available for folks in our community. So appreciate you listening to our proposal. And I think we're going to invite Gail up here for specifics in terms of the site plan and things like that because he's really our expert when it comes to that.
Okay, so I really don't have an awful lot to add. I think Jenna did a pretty good job of just summarizing what the project is all about. But there was a question about, again, water management. I just want to, verify for everybody that, we've been working with Excel Engineering to create this site plan. So they've been involved, and again, doing very, very preliminary, analysis. And obviously, after approval would be when we would get them involved and actually finalize a water management system to protect the neighboring areas. And then there was a question or a comment that Jenna made relative to the northern border. One of the things that we discovered fairly recently was we had kind of assumed that we had a drawing of the northern border. We kind of assumed that the trees were kind of going up to that border. Well, after we went out there and walked along the property, it turns out that there was a fence that was out there that we thought was on the border, but it was actually about 20 feet into the city property. Okay, so that 20 feet there was all grass. There's underground sprinkling there from the condo association. So as we looked at that, we says, well, we can't leave trees that are not there that have already been removed. So what we did in our site plan is we actually showed us replanting trees there, putting up evergreen screening so that we could block, headlights and so on and set up a nice screening for the condo association. So I just wanted to explain what happened there. And I guess that's about all I've got. I guess we really probably want to open it up for questions. There are some other documents that show some of the elevations and so on. If we want to look at those, that's fine. But I think I'd just like to hear what questions you might have. So,
Questions for the applicants? Go ahead, Nikki.
I'm not on. And this, Oh, and are we talking about rezoning right now?
Only about the rezoning, yeah.
Only about the rezoning, huh? The, first of all, this is a non-rezoning. Why is this a partnership? Why not just one, or why not just the other? I mean, it has nothing to do with this rezoning.
We have different targets in terms of a buyer. Our target has a slightly higher income than a Habitat buyer. But we understand that good neighborhoods are a mix of incomes, and that's why we came together. This partnership's a few years in the making, and it's important that as we mesh our missions, that we create a really high-quality mixed-income neighborhood that can really set the standard for developments in the future.
Okay, thank you, that works. And about the rezoning, one of the reasons for, this is not spot zoning, but one of the reasons for encouraging the rezoning, which would be normally 20 to 25 units and going higher, is it's already a dense area, so this works. This is dense, and there's another dense area. To me, that is not a reason. That would be saying, well, let's spread it out a little bit. Let's have a little less dense, because you do have this dense area to the south. I believe, is that Harbor Views? Is that the name of that apartment complex toward 40th? And so to me, that wasn't a reason for having a higher number of units in this one area. So I'm curious about that and why that was a rationale. And the other rationale was, I have my rationale for zoning, and because that was denser, and it was just because that's the only way they would be able to get this many units. And as you know, I attended the meeting, the Planning Commission meeting, and unfortunately I spoke up, which I probably maybe should not have spoken up. But one thing I did question at that time was the quality of the housing. And these two gentlemen were kind enough to take me around to different houses that Jubilee and Habitat have made and redeveloped or developed. And so that's not a question anymore. There will be fine houses. That's not my issue. But I did think it was a lot of houses for this area in this neighborhood. So I have to reconcile why this is, why we should make so many houses, why we should build so many houses in this one area. Harborview is also affordable. And so, there's a lot in that area, and I'm not afraid of people who live in affordable housing, but I just think a lot, because my other issue, as you know, is traffic. And Jenna, you did a nice job of saying, think of the bigger area. I still had the same issue. That, the study said it was taken in a pre-COVID, or in a COVID. It was not representative because of the COVID traffic, which was not much. I still had to make a right-hand turn because it's tough to get across Washington at any hour of the day. So I still am not, I have to, even though the studies are showing the traffic, and they're maybe in the future it'll be changed. So traffic and density are my issues. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Keith?
So I just want to make sure that we as staff are responsive. Nikki, I think some of that was really probably dialogue and probably discussion for all of you to have as policy makers, because ultimately this is your decision as to rezone or not to rezone. But if there's something in particular in there that you would like a question and answer on, I think probably most of that was potentially just let us know who can maybe address that. I took most of that as being a conversation opener for all of you.
Yes.
But if there's something specific, I want to make sure that we provide a response to your question.
Okay, very good. Point taken.
It might also be helpful, but I'm not going to make them do it unless I see council that would like. Ron is here tonight to maybe talk through kind of what is before council next week, and what isn't, and kind of how that procedurally works. I don't know if council would like to hear that, or if that's clear or unclear.
As one of the 3 new members of council, I think that that would be helpful.
If I might ask a question before you get into that.
Sure.
It relates to what Nikki has. Maybe I can help Nikki out your very specific question. If this was to stay R1, financially, what would that look like?
You know, if we're trying to get towards the affordable end of mixed income housing, it makes it much more difficult. You know, a huge chunk of what we have to do is spreading the cost of the property purchase and the infrastructure over units. And, you know, quite honestly, on 40th Street, the project we're doing there, we're spending way too much per unit in order for the houses to be affordable. But we're gonna make them affordable and we gotta go out and raise some extra money. So, yeah, it's certainly an affordability question. The other thing is, if you look at, you know, the density of the whole area, we're less dense than Harbor Village and Pioneer Village. So, it's not that we're trying to push the density envelope, we're actually less dense because we want green space. We've purposely designed it so that there's a lot of green space for families to get their kids out and play. We think that's really important. And we didn't push that to the nth degree. We tried to maintain more green space than, I don't want to say was necessary, but we felt this is a good mix. And when you look at it, the units per acre were less than both of the developments to the north and south.
It's just and I'm gonna share Nikki's concerns here. And I've been pretty consistent on the record of density because of the area that I live up in the Heights where we have a disproportionate amount of density. The two run hand in hand, the traffic and the density. You can't separate them. It's just really hard to separate the fact that you could potentially have 20, 25 single homes in there or 42 multi-family. I understand, I appreciate the fact, I wholeheartedly agree, and I've never disagreed that we need more affordable housing. There's a but. When and where? That's always the big question that we have around here, and that's because it's just the rezoning that's in front of us and nothing else. That's all we can look at. Is it right for the neighborhood? Is it right for that end of the city? Is it getting our master plan? Is it doing all this other stuff? That's all the stuff that, and you guys are fully aware of this, not your first time here. So, personally, I'm gonna have to be convinced that that's going to justify the rezoning or what's going in it. I appreciate the fact that you reduced it, but that doesn't take away from what's there. To me, that's adding to what's there and what could be, if you understand where I'm going with that. So, thank you very much for the answer. I appreciate that.
Thank you for putting my concerns into a question.
Yeah, Jay?
I don't know that, to me, having driven down the 36th Street off from Washington, probably the people most affected are those folks, seems to me. I don't know if that's a fair statement or not. If the planning commission has had this discussion, and we've already got this hammered out, I apologize, but what can we do? Is there anything that can be done about doing something to 36th Street, doing something to that drive from Washington into the entrance that gives it a little more breathing room? Is there any creative widening? And I know you can't make dirt out of nothing, but what are your thoughts about what's going to happen from Washington driving into the the development?
Go ahead, Keith.
Sure. So, basically, that's your decision, really. I mean, working with the city engineer as to whether or not the city would want to pay for, potentially like a dedicated right turn lane. That's a potential. However, there have been other items that have been discussed that potentially the city would do, such as adding a sidewalk to the north side of 36th Street, and certainly resurfacing 36th Street once the project is done.
So but it's narrow. We have standards for roads. I'm guessing this isn't part of this. We're not, you can't put our standard, was it 66-foot road standard? That's not possible there. Don't let me, I'm not, these are all questions.
So
These
in
are all
this,
questions.
yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So in the staff report, this has been a conversation. It was talked about in the planning commission process, kind of, and
Right.
why I really moved it from the developers to staff is because that was a discussion that's been had. In the staff report, it talks about a potential city task, things that we've already talked about, but that the city of Holland, we proposed in the planning commission process, would make improvements to 36th Street following the completion of both of the phases. Why after both of the phases? Because in this city and others, we found that you don't make improvements to a road before there's construction, because then you just tear it up. So what we've potentially outlined, which again would need to come back before council, but I think it's fair to say kind of our recommendation at this point with the input of the traffic study and that was required of the developer, but also with Brian White and his team, is that we would resurface West 36th at the end of the construction, that we would install sidewalk on the north side of the street within the existing city right-of-way, that would be part of the resurfacing process. And then as it talked about in the traffic study, that we would make sure that we'd cut and maintain vegetation on the corners of 36th Street and South Washington, and that we'd sign West 36th to not permit on-street parking. And there has been a request in some of the back and forth with public comment. Again, this is in council's policy purview, but we would not be looking at any assessments or anything with that on the current property owners, that we would look at the resurfacing, the expansion, and the installation of that sidewalk as being part of existing city funds, and also the CDBG program where we're looking to putting sidewalks in necessary areas. So at this point, that would be the staff recommendation that's in the report that, and there's a lot of things that have to happen before we get to that point, but that's where we would stand right now, pending some other actions that are first and foremost in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jay, this was one of my concerns too at the planning commission level. And numbers that are in the report from planning commission, that's a 33-foot right-of-way there. So we can't do a 66-foot. And I think approximately 25 of that 33 feet is paved right now. And I was a real skeptic about the traffic on this. That I looked at that and I thought, how can you go from the smaller number of houses that are on 36th Street right now and add 42 units to that and not have traffic problems in there? And the traffic study proved me wrong. You know, my gut tells me it should be a big problem, but the experts who did the traffic study said it wouldn't. And then two other developments in the city were pointed out to me. One is Cobblestone, which comes off of Grafscup, which is not as busy as 36th Street is, but the configuration of the layout of that is actually very similar to this. And that's a neighborhood that I find myself in frequently because I've got a lot of friends that live in that area and some that we actually pick up on a frequent basis. There's almost never any traffic there. And I think that there are even more units there than there would be in this development. And then the other one that was brought to my attention was Knollwood, which is out near, what is that, 112th Street? 112th and 32nd Street, which is also a fairly similar configuration. That one does have multiple entrances and exits, but Cobblestone only just has the one. And lots of single-family units, lots of townhome units, lots of vehicles in that neighborhood, but almost not ever a traffic issue. And when I started thinking about those and my experiences with those, I thought, you know what, there may not be that traffic issue that my gut told me initially that there would be. Yeah, Mike?
Well, and I suppose I better turn this thing on, even though my big mouth doesn't need it all the time. I've perused this traffic study a couple of times. I'm no expert, and I'm not gonna plan to be one, but I do know numbers, and the numbers don't add up to me. There's nothing coming together. They're doing this little study over here and this little study over here, and it wasn't COVID, or it was COVID, and their totals for that trip area just don't add up. So I wanna go through, before I make a final judgment on that, I wanna go through it one more time. I still won't be an expert, but I'll have a little bit more in the top of my head. One big question I have to ask of you: you went out and searched more land to develop, added more development, fantastic, you're looking for the city. Have you exhausted every possible outlet to have another road going out of that to the south or to the east? Has that been totally exhausted, or is there a potential?
From what I can see, and again, I'm no expert on roads, it's, the only way to do it coming out of that neighborhood would be to get a right-of-way from somebody's private property. Everything surrounding that is private property. To the west is a private road. Obviously, to the south is the apartments that are down there. On the east side are all the medical buildings, which are parking lots. I believe, you know, and Keith, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be illegal to try to put something through there that would be a regular road. And then to the north is Pioneer Village. So I don't know of any other way to come out of that at all, Mike.
We gotta be going pretty close, though, to 37th Street, if there was a right-of-way there at one point on the south end, 37th or 38th Street. So I don't wanna to get into a big discussion here. However, I would like to see if there's at all any possibility, whether you can work out a deal with some private land there or something that we might, that seems to be the sticking point, okay? I think that would alleviate a lot of people's concerns. I have not heard anything about the type of unit in there, anything like this. Most of the problem, or most of the issue, has been the traffic for the people on 36th Street, and I had that same concern when the first proposal came. That concern has now just doubled, or tripled, or whatever the case may be. So if you might explore that and check it out. I know it's gonna add cost, I fully understand that.
I just make one comment about this, comment about doubling or tripling. So the original RFP was requesting units for up to 30 units, okay, on just the city property. And we've since gone from 30 to 42 on twice as much land. So I think, we just gotta make sure we're clear on what's gonna happen with the numbers here. It is an increase, but we've also increased the volume of land by 2 times.
Yeah, Scott?
I have a few questions, but is there a way that Ron could speak to what our limits within the questioning, what the parameters are before we go to?
Yeah, anybody else have a comment to make before Ron gets into where our parameters are? Yeah. All right, Ron, you're up.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you sort of heard from Jenna already on the approval process, our ordinance code has developed a sort of a tiered approach to approval. First, at the highest level really is the zoning, which is what's before you, determining the zone category for this property. And that's your role. It's a discretionary legislative role. You have to act reasonably, not arbitrarily, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. Underneath that is the site plan review and approval process, where the nuts and bolts of this project are reviewed, and that's been assigned to the Planning Commission. That's not a zoning, it's a zoning issue because it's part of the zoning code, but it's not a rezoning issue for the property. And so the design of the project, whether it meets all the requirements the city has in its ordinance code for the development of project, that's assigned to the planning commission. That does not come back before council for approval there. There's also the level of stormwater control. It's been mentioned tonight, and about, I think it was about a year ago, council adopted a rather robust, not rather, but really robust stormwater control ordinance that requires a permit before development and requires an ongoing maintenance agreement for stormwater maintenance, so that stormwater is managed on the property. You have the backup of common law that says the high property drains to the low property, and low property has to accept the water, but the high property can't increase the flow. And that's what happens a lot of times with developments, and that's why the stormwater ordinance was adopted. And it was not just something pulled out of the air either. It was developed in conjunction with engineers, with the, I think it was the Fishbeck Thompson Group out of Grand Rapids, and designed to be approved, or to meet the state stormwater standards for permits. And then you have the actual construction that carries this out, that's supervised by Community and Neighborhood Services, and the construction inspection process. And of course, that's not before you. But back to the zoning, then, what your role in deciding the zoning is to look at the appropriate category for this property under our ordinance code. So currently it's R1. Jenna's described what can be built in R1. You need to determine, is that a reasonable classification for this property? Or is the PRD that's requested something that's more reasonable for this property, or equally reasonable for this property? And so you need to sort of compare what could be built in R1 to what could be built in the PRD development, and say, are we going from something that would be reasonable to unreasonable? Are we going from something that's unreasonable to something reasonable? Where does that go? But that's where your discretion is to do that. And in looking at that type of thing, Jenna mentioned, I think spot zoning, or a report does, not that this is, but mentions that's a criteria that they look at. You don't want to take a spot and a small piece of property and change the zoning different from their surrounding areas so that it's out of character with those areas. Probably an easy way to give an example is, you don't want to have a heavy industrial area, and in the middle put a block that's residential. That's an extreme example, but it's easy to see the analysis of that there. But when you get down to the R1 or PRD, R1, R2, those are always really close calls, and that's where it goes up to your discretion in deciding what's reasonable. And that's the issue that you're looking at tonight, is what's the reasonable category to put this property in? And reasonable can be more than one category, but the request is for PRD. So is it reasonable to rezone this property in light of the surrounding areas and the characters of this property tonight? Of course, you're not going to vote tonight. That'll be next week. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, so when you say we're only to look at the reasonableness between the two different zoning, and really all the other issues, characteristics of the property, belongs to the site plan and belongs to the planning commission. So when we start talking about things like traffic, lighting, access, density, snow removal, connectivity to neighborhoods, delivery trucks, stormwater, storage, parking, landscaping, storage, fence, when we start talking about all that, that's supposed to be addressed by the planning commission.
The nuts and bolts of those things are addressed by the planning commission, and all of the details. I think it might be easiest to say that your level of review is to determine whether this property and the surrounding area would support the type of uses that are allowed in the PRD, in particular the use that's been proposed here.
Right. And so additionally, things like affordability, who's building it, that necessarily is not our responsibility. It's whether or not what we're approving to be in that area is reasonable based on what's around it.
Right. The Zoning Enabling Act the state has tells us that the city can divide the city into districts and put classifications on what can be built in those districts. And that's what you're looking at here is, does this property reasonably fit within the classifications or the allowed uses for the PRD zone district?
But it sounds like maybe even the word affordability might be stretching what our responsibility is. So then when it comes to density, that's probably the more likely thing that would be important for us to consider when we're talking about the difference between the different zones that we're looking at here. Density would be more of a reasonable evaluation behind this board.
To try and avoid an example that would be too close to this particular one, because that's your job to decide the zoning. But for example, if someone were to propose to put, again, just to pick an extreme, absurd example, a factory on 8th Street up in the Heights, you'd look at that and you'd say, you know, it's not reasonable in connection with the rest of the property around it. And secondly, the infrastructure up there wouldn't support a factory use. I'm sort of guessing at that point now, but that would be a consideration. So you'd look at those type of things, and that's what you'd look at here as well.
Okay, I guess.
Only
Last
this is a,
comment-
you know,
Last comment is just, I just don't know that we should be working our way, through this board, talking about the size of a fence in the west end.
those are,
Or the bushes, or the lighting. I mean, that stuff already been done by the planning
Right.
commission and should have been addressed before it came here.
those are
Ours
deep,
is more of an up
I'm
and
sorry.
down vote on whether we want to rezone
Yeah.
and what the reasonableness on that rezoning is.
Fences, lighting, and that type of thing are the standards for site plan approval.
Thank you.
Other questions for Ron, or general questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Hoekstra. I was not sure whether that was an official throat clearing or not.
I was working my way to a final decision on whether I wanted to say something or not. So every second counted. If I may.
Certainly, of course.
Just a general comment. When, the first time that we took a look at this project and had the long discussions that we did, when we were all finished with that and I saw what was being proposed by those who Habitat and Jubilee, I thought it was a fine project, and I thought that the area would support that, and I had no problem with it. Looking at it now and seeing that there's additional property involved, I said, oh, that's interesting. So it took me a little bit by surprise. And I guess one of my concerns was accessibility too. And I know that we've talked on other occasions with our planning staff about connectivity of neighborhoods, and that seems to be difficult in this case. And I know that we're part of the package is providing an emergency access road, and but I'm guessing that the nature of those properties, the 904, 906, 9, whatever the other one is, I can't read my own writing. Apparently, they didn't come with access to those properties, either implied or deeded, or I think that accessibility would have been part of what the consideration to Planning Commission. So I guess that leaves those properties sort of landlocked, and I understand why a guy would want to divest himself of those, because what else are you going to do with them if you have no access from anywhere to them? I don't know what else you could do with them. So it fit nicely into your plan to expand the original footprint of the project. I too don't want to cross any boundaries here, what we should be talking about and what we leave to the Planning Commission. I guess just in general, I do believe that the impetus for a project like this is still extremely valid. Affordable housing may not be as strict a discipline as like a zoning code, but it is a priority that we've established and that we recognize, the whole community recognizes the need. And the availability of spaces to accomplish that is very limited, and we all know that. So when we look at a project like this that actually addresses that need, rather nicely, I would say. It is a major consideration. It's something that we have to put a fair amount of weight on as we deliberate about what our actions are going to be. So that's a kind of a long way, roundabout way of saying, even though I have a couple of reservations about this project, I think the Planning Commission has done due diligence. I think there will be further due diligence done in addressing some of the concerns that folks in the area have. I also think that this is a project that would move forward one of our pressing priorities, and that is providing housing for a large number of folks who need it and can't afford it at this point. So I just took up a whole bunch of time there for, I don't know if it was a good reason or not, but I feel better. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nikki.
Yeah, and I think those are very fair statements, and I can't disagree with those statements. I would like to see myself, and this is, and we're rezoning, and I know this is just a rezoning question, but I have to say to respond to a couple comments, and one is going on to Graskup, it's a country road, and so that's not a fair, that's apples and oranges. But the other is if the city, and I know with the traffic study, this was not indicated, but with a bus stop across Washington, if there was a light there, you could have cars stacked up, but you could get across safely. And that's all. With that number of units and assuming the number of cars, that would just make a big difference. I also wonder from the developers, what's your break-even point? Is it 42? Is it 40? I mean, we're just dickering now with numbers, but number of units.
I don't know that we have an exact number there,
Okay.
because again, as we get into the water management side of this, there's some costs there that are not defined yet. Do you hear that okay?
Oh, yeah. For the folks at home, we'd love to have you come up.
Okay, sorry. That's right, yeah. I just want to say, again, I don't think there's an exact business case and a break-even point there. Because as we get into the water management side of this, there are costs that, they can vary by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, and that will be the next step to really sort that out and make sure this is feasible, with the numbers we have. So.
Yeah. And you're not running a
That's fair.
profit model anyway.
Right.
I've had a little experience with Habitat. You're looking at donor money that's being able to make up the difference between what it actually costs to build that home versus what you're selling it for.
Right.
Thank you. And we fully support that concept and affordable housing. I just say it's a difficult spot to me. It's not the fact that we want to build affordable houses.
Yeah, Jay.
Steve and John, the marketing we've been doing, and we've been talking about it, do you have some sense that the interest and the populations you're swimming with every day and talking to, and families that you're serving, have you got some sense that there's people waiting for this thing to happen? Do you have any sense of that? Or haven't you really done any marketing yet because you're not sure we're going to even get there?
I can answer that anecdotally. Our partner, HomeCore, put a house for sale in this target sale price Friday night. Saturday morning, there were 6 offers on it on 17th Street. So there's pent-up demand in that under 250 range. Yeah. We haven't started marketing specifically to this yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea from a Habitat perspective, we have right now 104 inquiries as to what the Habitat program is, and out of that, we probably have close to 30 that would be acceptable applicants right now. And again, like Steve said, we haven't marketed this because everybody knows what's going on, but we haven't gone out and said, hey, this is a possibility, so. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Raul. Oh, you're going to take it, Quincy?
Yeah. I was tardy, so I wanted to know the units and the breakdown of the units if possible. And then also, looking at the map, I don't know if, hold on one second. I want to make sure I have this right. 36th Street on the back side of the property that's behind the condos. I don't know if there would be an opportunity to connect to that or not. So that's another, when Mike was talking about other opportunities, that's the one that I see and would like more information on that as well. So if someone also could give me the information about the count.
Sure, Quincy. So right here on your screen, you can see that they're proposing two different phases. So phase one, I'm sorry, I'm not sure why that's doing that. Phase one would be the northern portion, which is the city site. 19 proposed single-family homes, where 9 of them would be detached, and the remaining 10 would be 2 and 3 unit, still single-family homes, but in the townhouse configuration. And then in the southern portion of the site, a total of 23 single-family homes. 9, again, would be detached, and then the remaining 14 would be, again, the configuration of single-family attached townhomes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing. And I apologize, what was your second question?
That was it.
Okay.
Oh, that was, I'm sorry, my other question was about connectivity to 36th Street.
Oh, okay.
Jenna, would you maybe show them the renderings?
The renderings.
Yeah, for the elevation.
Certainly. So this is what's being proposed for the homes, for the detached houses. 3 different elevation styles, so they would have a mixture of these within those 18 homes. And then these are what's being proposed for the Jubilee townhomes. And again, these would be modular, and it's pretty interesting to hear about how that all works and how they put those together. If perhaps you want to speak to that briefly. But again, those are the 3 unit, and then further on is the 2 unit configurations of those.
Quincy, follow-up, or otherwise I've got Raul, I think, was.
Yeah,
wanted to make a
I do
comment.
have another question. This
Sure.
it's a different question altogether, so, and I don't know if we have this already written down, but we have 2 different markets that we're currently looking at, that you're looking at. And in that market, what is the breakdown for number-wise and what we have, like for townhomes and single-family homes for the market that Habitat is hitting and for the market that Jubilee is hitting as well?
Yeah, so the townhomes, again, are those different, the different configurations. So 18 of the 42 units would be Habitat homes. And again, remind me what AMI that is?
That's 30 to 80% of the AMI. So about $30,000 annual income up to about 55 to 60 for the Habitat homes.
And then the remaining, so 42 minus 19, would be the Jubilee homes, townhomes, which are for the
80 to 120%.
AMI. You're welcome.
Raul, did you have a comment? Yep.
I'm going to be looking for some numbers specifically, but there are definitely a lot of, I think, pieces to this entire project that inform my feelings about it. And I think I've expressed in the past just my feelings with affordability and our need for it. And I think Dave articulated a lot of my own sentiments super well, but I also understand Brother Corbin's position, and you know, what's in front of us is the zoning. And so just kind of, I guess, being more informed about density and, you know, the area. I think we've had these numbers before, but the number of units in Pioneer Village and then the Harbor Village, what are those? And then maybe even more so per, I don't know, square footage or whatever, but per the property. And then, if I recall correctly, was the initial, you know, some of the plans that we initially saw a while back, was that for 23 units? Right, for our parcel of property, but then that was extended, so now we're looking at more or less per square footage.
Yeah, Raul, I know that we did discuss at Planning Commission the number, I think the number you're looking for is units per acre.
There you
So-
go.
Yep, and I know that Jubilee, I know has had those numbers before. I think at Planning Commission, they gave us the numbers for how many units per acre in Pioneer, how many units per acre in this project. I don't know if they've got them for Harbor Village or not. I don't remember that number, but Jenna, do you have those?
Yeah, so for Pioneer Village, it's 7.5 per acre, whereas the Habitat Jubilee site would be 5.6 per acre. For Harbor Village, we don't have it broken up because we don't know the acreage off the top of our heads. However, we do know that there's 120 units in the Harbor Village apartment complex.
And I think we did calculate it at one point, and that's a higher density than this, but I don't think we can rattle off the number.
Yeah.
So we'll get that for you for the July 1 meeting.
Yes.
And does that one also have just one access point to 40th?
Yes, Harbor Village is one.
I think it's just one, yeah.
Oh, yeah, in fact, I asked that, I went back there. So Harbor Village has one access onto 40th, and it's, we believe, I think we're right on this, it's 120 units.
Okay.
And another similar one, and I was looking at Mark, if you think of it's Meadow Lane townhouses between 40th and Matt Urban, is one in, one out, and that's gotta be
It's 125-ish.
125 units. So, and facts only, right? So those are just facts and situations, number of units onto, in some cases, different types of roads. Meadow Lane being a different stretch of the same road, but we do have similar instances in the immediate vicinity.
Great. That's what I was asking, just the facts, just the numbers. So thank you.
Yeah, there's one other similar, we've had that conversation before. There are other roads in the city of Holland that are similar to the width of 36th Street. Am I correct on that as well?
Yeah, I would say there's many roads the width of 36th Street. Now, without a doubt, and I think Jenna talked about this, there's a difference between, you know, the type of use. So no, I don't think anyone's debating. This is a dramatic change for the 10 residents that have been on 36th Street. But there are other instances where there's this type of traffic volume on a road like that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just a quick piece of information.
Oh, yeah.
Harbor Village is 9.5 acres with 120 units. So you can do the quick math on that to get to, a little over 12 units per acre.
Thank you for doing the math for me on that. I appreciate it. Scott?
Just similar, yeah, Cobblestone, what, is that off Roscoe Road?
Yeah.
And so that's 92 homes, 28 acres, but it dumps out on the Grafsco Road. Doesn't dump out on 36. Maplewood subdivision, we just approved to a PD just recently. 46 units, roughly 7.79 acres, I guess, is what it is. But it dumps out on the 40th Street. Jubilee on 40th Street, 2.5 acres, 10 units, dumps out on 40th Street. Jubilee Habitat, 40th Street, 3.9 acres, 5 units. So it dumps out on 40th Street. These are different type of infrastructure. And so when we talk about density, you know, we need to really kind of consider what that means Now, I will give benefit to Jubilee and Habitat when they mentioned the original property, they were looking at, what was it, 3.7 acres, 30 homes, right, roughly. And now they expanded 7.4 acres, which is 42 homes. So you've really kind of, I guess, fewer units, if you will, on the amount of space that you were originally proposing. So it's kind of neat to see what they're proposing, but at the same time, we have apples to oranges when we talk about what infrastructure supports that, and what's around it. And I'm trying to speak to the density issue and the infrastructure that supports it, which is probably within our purview.
Lynn?
Yeah. I can see, I was kind of going back and forth about this, because I can certainly see that you could interpret this space either way. You could choose to do the east-west R1 or the north-south R3, R5, and I'm landing on the R3, R5 line. That's what makes me feel like this fits into the neighborhood. I think that I certainly understand the 36th Street concerns. And I think what I keep coming back to is, after being on the Planning Commission for a couple of years now, this is what happens when we allow private roads all the time. This is exactly what happens. We have no outlet except one for this particular area. And we talked about that at Planning Commission yesterday. Unfortunately, I was unable to be there for the first hour. But I certainly would hope that we would strongly consider, or think about this sort of thing when we consider private roads again. I was wondering, I understand the concern about the road getting beaten up while you're, as the construction is coming in and building those homes. Is there any way that we could consider improving 36th Street before the construction starts? Is there anything we could do to allow for that?
So what do you mean by improving? Are you talking about the sidewalk at that point, or the width?
Whatever we were considering doing in the staff report, can we do that now instead of waiting 2 years?
But construction's gonna continue.
Yeah.
Coming in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least as far as I'm concerned, yes, but I
You mean
think
like
that
put a sidewalk in now?
the staff report considers putting in a sidewalk, improving the road, landscaping. I can't remember what else was on there, but,
Yeah, so the items, ultimately, that's a policy level decision. I'll throw in my 2 cents, maybe recommendation on that, and I think why the staff recommendation was it was. It's not in front of me right now, so Mark and Jenna, help me if I forget something. We said that we would be looking at installing a sidewalk within the right-of-way. I'll say that I think the sidewalk installation is more so, and the conceptually after construction is because then that's when the people would be living there, so the additional people would be living there to facilitate that back and forth. And then the resurfacing of, so not a total reconstruction, but a resurfacing of. And then it would be not adding vegetation, it would be making sure that at the corner of 36th and Washington, that we would have clear sight lines. So it's not adding landscaping, it's actually making sure that you have clear view distances there. Certainly within, and this would be eventually a different conversation for council, we would typically not recommend doing a resurfacing before you have construction, because it's during construction when you have all the equipment coming in and out that is the most taxing on the road surface. So I think the fear would be there would be a significant investment that you would almost have to very quickly go back in and redo that investment at that point. So we would not recommend that, but that's not our policy decision ultimately to make.
Quincy?
Going off what Lynn said, I guess to help us make that decision, could we get numbers with that? I guess the life expectancy with and without doing it with that traffic going across, that construction traffic going across it, and dollar amounts that would be associated with that. I know that's a kind of a big ask, but I mean, if that's something that we're gonna talk about, that's kind of the information that we need to really make an educated decision on it, to say yes or no.
And Mike, I'm gonna lean on you a little bit here. From a process standpoint, that would not necessarily be part of the decision-making process on the rezoning. That would be a separate decision that we would need to make.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure folks are clear on that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well,
Nikki.
as long as we're having these, you know, additional things, I would be interested in seeing what some kind of crosswalk or something at the, going across Washington. It is not 40th, it is not 32nd Street, it is not Matt Urban Drive, it is not Grasscliff Road, it's Washington, and it's hugely busy, and I am concerned, and I know that's not a rezoning question. We'll rezone on rezoning merits, but I can't believe that isn't a consideration when you have crosswalks on 9th Street with able-bodied, young Hope College students, you know, to help them across a tiny street. And here's this, you know, a bus stop and a lot of, now more residents.
So I want to be cautious in how I address that,
Yes.
because again, these are policy matters for you, but I will say that the traffic study did address that. And I will say that from a staff perspective, and particularly talking with Brian White, who doubles, right, as our traffic engineer, interpreter, or
I respect his
managing those
expertise.
types of things.
Correct.
Warrants, which we would need to do like a crosswalk or anything there, would not be met to put a crosswalk there. And if they would, I would say that if you'd go up and down Washington from 16th Street at least up, then we would basically have a situation where we would get into more than two hands very quickly of the number of crosswalks that we would be probably adding for similar type of situations. And I think that's one of the reasons why the warrants, which aren't created by us, in the traffic study said that such a treatment would not be met for that intersection.
Lynn?
Yeah, so just to finish my thought, so the reason I lean towards approving the rezoning is because I feel like this is, although it doesn't feel like a compromise because it seems like a lot of units, and it is, if you think only of the single-family homes to the east and west, but I feel like it's a compromise between the several different zone districts around there. And then I was looking at the rezoning criteria, and the only one I had a question about was, well, the one that didn't, was C. Jenna, I don't know if you could clarify that for me. I'm just not exactly certain what I'm reading there. And the reason I picked that one out is because when you ask a question and then you either answer yes, no, or potentially, and all the other ones say yes, this one says potentially. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Hold it up for a second. This one?
Okay, so is the proposed... Sure. Is the proposed use compatible with other zoning and land uses in the area? Right, but then I have to say, if so, so the answer is yes. So if so, would it be more appropriate to add the proposed use to the existing district as a use permitted by right or by special use permit than to rezone? And so my response was potentially, but then, you know, for all R1 zone districts throughout the city, that would also potentially be incorporated. So, so that would mean that there would be a reduction to the minimum lot size, that you could have townhomes. So potentially, yeah, but it wouldn't just be for this one site, it would be citywide.
Yeah, the difference is rezoning this parcel versus changing the entire zoning ordinance for the city.
Well, here's a,
Yeah, go ahead, Nikki.
once we move to Udo, that kind of classification, will that take care of some of these rezoning questions, or was that still, we have to go through all of this?
Yeah, so with Udo, we would still have a planned unit development zone district for exactly situations like this, where there isn't another possibility to do the development. So specifically with Udo, we're trying to really incorporate more housing types and mixed use and things like that. But in R1, that's not something that the city has determined that, you want to do citywide. So that's where these PRDs, or going forward, it'll just be PUDs, are valuable, so that those different projects can happen.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, great, thank you very much. Let me get back to the agenda. Next item, the final fiscal year 2020 strategic plan and business plan report. Mr. Van Beek.
And doesn't that sound like fun? Okay. So, I will take as much time as you would want me to take here, but I will try to read the room also. You have this in your packet. Obviously, this is one of those, you have it in your packet now. My recommendation, this is the first time through with this. So my recommendation is that this would go on the agenda next week, and that then you would basically take draft off of this and accept it as the final report on the strategic business plan of 2020. Just kind of a reflection on this. This is I think it's fair to, this is the first time this would ever happen. This was the maiden voyage of the strategic and business plan. And quite frankly, remember, dating back, this dates back to the city council advance, not of January 2020. This dates back to, we're about to finish the process that started at the council advance in January of 2019. So again, I will not belabor this too much. If you go through the 4 goal areas, and I understand it's very busy on this screen, but in your packet you can zoom in on it easier. Going from left to right, the objective to the strategy, tactic, deliverable, to the assignment, timeline, to the outcomes. The way governance would talk about this is that this becomes what I'd call the handshake from the policy and the goals and the directions that council provides in things like the vision, mission, values, goals, and objectives. And that objective then kind of becomes the handshake then off to where myself and staff put together the strategies, tactics, and deliverables, and the timelines and the outcomes, where this is how we deliver on the goals that you've established. Hopefully, the thing that you have new this evening is that last column. And monitoring organizational performance sounds like a very kind of technical, like what does that mean? And really that comes directly out of Dave Miedema's governance, because it talks about monitoring of council, of myself in particular, but really of overall staff in the organization. And quarterly, we provide reports on this, and then this would be that final report. So that's where you see fiscal year 2020 final report. And just kind of en masse, what we tried to do, and I'm not going to claim that we've even captured everything, but what we've done is just given you kind of a snapshot of all of the things that that the organization has accomplished in fiscal year 2020. Again, kind of the stoplight methodology that we've used is that red would be there was a problem and the goal is in trouble. And yellow means, hey, there's some risk, let's talk. And green means we're on track. And I think especially at the end of the year, green means, from my perspective, that great progress was made and a lot of things were moved forward. There were no reds, and yellow were things that it's like, well, this is still very much kind of a cautionary tale, not so much a little bit moving forward, but also like, hey, this continues to be a problem. You'll see that the areas that we've identified, at least at this point, for your draft consideration, are financial in nature, largely because of this last couple quarter impact of COVID. So when we look at budgets, when we look at municipal capital improvement funds and street funds, there definitely is concern in those areas. When we take a look at our OPEB liabilities, there's concern in those areas. And that's in the face of that. I think we've made great progress and that we've been successful, but I think there are areas of continuing concern. The other things, and again, I'll go through as much of this in detail as you would like, but I'll read the room and suspect that maybe you'd like to just read and have already read or would like to read this on your own. On page 3, there are just some things with boards, committees, and commissions. I also put yellow there because we had hopes of getting that accomplished at this point, and I don't think through any fault of anyone, getting the report a little bit later than planned from the county, and then not really being able to work with the mayor and Nikki and Lynn, which is your assigned subcommittee work on this. That just didn't happen. No, that did not happen in the last 3 months. But I'm sure that they'll be giving me direction and we'll pick that up.
Come on, you can put all the blame on me on that one if you want to.
But
Mike is.
While we're here, can I ask a question? You want to wait? until we're
Absolutely.
done?
Yeah, go ahead.
Somehow I missed that we had a subcommittee doing that, and I have all the confidence in the world of the people you mentioned. But I don't know what that charge is. I'm hoping that will come back in a way that says, here's where we are, here's what we're thinking. I think a couple of us have been talking about the need to do this for several years. You've got 3 of the newest people on that committee, all very talented, but I have pretty reasons why I hope we get another shot at the good work that they're doing so that it doesn't come back in the way of a strong recommendation that this is what we do.
No, that was the intent, exactly what you're talking about, Jay.
Okay,
That's
good.
yeah, we're
That's what I
looking at, we actually had one meeting before COVID on this where we sat down and started looking at the report that we got from the county and started looking at the boards, committees, and commissions
Good.
that we have.
Okay.
And that my full intent was, let's come back to full council because
Thank
I know I'm acutely aware of the fact that the 3 of us are the 3 newest ones that are here.
That's
Yeah.
good. No, I'm nothing.
No, great. No, thank you.
And they really build off of the recommendations that came right out of the county report. And I think these 3 were the lucky ones that put their hand up
Yeah.
when you were looking for a, so.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yes, I will say I'm very bullish, if that's the right word, that I hope that the community and you as mayor and council really view this as a success. That when you take a look at the discussions from the advance of January 2019, and you take a look at then us putting together, your team, putting together a business plan that you adopted in June of 2019, that you reviewed and adopted, and then take a look at, okay, what was actually accomplished in that year. I think this is an impressive document, and I hope that this is something then that we can continue to repeat. I think this is really good for organizations. Even just going through this process of capturing all of this, I was reminded of many things because you just lose track of it, and I think that this is helpful, if not for anything else, that let's say we do something very similar to this for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. You can always go back and you can know, I can look at one place and I can have a pretty good idea of kind of the encapsulation of all of the things that were accomplished in that past year. So I think it's helpful, if not for anything else, for that reason, but hopefully you find it helpful for other reasons also. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions, whether now or offline, but my recommendation would be, and I'm looking for kind of process would be that we would formally put this on the agenda for next week, that you would adopt this, and then we would put this out and on the website underneath both your and my department, so it can be found easily by our citizens. And then over years again, then people can see kind of the history of these strategic and business plans.
Questions for Keith, comments? Yeah, Nikki.
Yeah, I will. Actually, I was glad to see this. I mean, so we, I mean, we're council people, and this is what we did, and so it was nice to review, and nice to go back, and nice to see the green and the yellow and no red. And actually, it was very nice to see, as you mentioned, how much we actually have accomplished, despite being, having the COVID in our face. So it was nice to see we're well on our way, actually, with LGBT. That's on the way, the affordable housing, some of our issues. And the one thing, of course, and I'm sorry if I keep bringing this up, but the CEP, and I know, and you have written and you have said that we have a structure for this. There's a structure in place to take care of this. But I feel that beyond that structure, which will be a meeting, and I'll be part of that meeting later on this summer and the fall, I think now to address it, as we mentioned before, in a study session, with all of us just talking about the community energy plan, and we have a structure, and yet there's another part to it, which is the climate change part of it, that is, I think it brings in a lot of these other issues. It brings in social justice, of which our LGBT population is a part of, the affordable housing population is a part of. Some of these, it encompasses a lot, and I just would feel it would bring in our community, where we have stakeholders and we want community connections, and I think if we can just have this more of a loose conversation among us, then I will feel better that we're on track with that, as opposed to, yes, we do have a structure, but I'm not feeling that. I'm not seeing that anything is really getting off the dime like with the other visions that we had.
Well, just remember that the things that we talked about in January aren't reflected in this yet.
I understand.
Okay,
This is the last, right?
Yeah, because this is for
Correct.
last
That's why
year, for the
CEP
previous
is
year.
correct.
So those four things, I'm assuming anyway, Keith, you've been working on those, and something that, because the fiscal year starts in a week, so we're gonna be seeing something like this from you very soon for 2021, correct?
Exactly. And, it's interesting, and priorities do change. Correct. So actually, Nikki, if you take a look at community energy plan, I thought about giving the entire business plan from 2020, but the category ranking, the community energy plan in the advance of January of 2019, the community energy plan had a weighted 31 votes, which was tied for 24th place. So you went from 24th place, and I know that's weird, and it doesn't mean that it's not a priority,
These are ranked.
but it shifted pretty significantly in 1 year. So I think you've already seen, and I know that's not exactly the only reason that you brought that up, right? But that's why we do this business plan portion every year, And then you should expect to see then different weighting of priority, and that's what we're gonna bring forward. But the mayor is correct, technically, I think we do it in the right process because we have to build the budget off of your advanced conversations, which means we really need to start it and do it about when we do. But then it feels weird yet because quite frankly, we haven't started the business plan year that's driven by that council advanced conversation, which especially because of COVID, how long does that feel like it was ago? It feels like it was I get it, right? But hopefully, so I hear you completely. I think you're gonna see when we present the new business plan, which is a little delayed too because of all the craziness, and I don't think there's gonna be an easy spot on the agenda in the next couple meetings to probably bring that forward either. And I'll admit, I'm behind. I freely admit that. But I think hopefully you'll also see that as we work this, at the end of the process, you're gonna see that we make progress on your priorities. And that's my responsibility to report to you using a methodology of this to show how we can move the ball forward.
Other questions, comments? Yeah, the only comment I had was, in looking at this, I thought to myself, we didn't have pretty much the last quarter of this fiscal year due to COVID. And the amount of green that there is here, despite that, I think is pretty impressive that, that staff was able to bring stuff to the finish line as much as they were.
It is
So
a
thank you
team
for that.
effort and it includes all of you, right? Because we're talking about an issue like tonight and in a couple weeks where some of those big things, they are not, quite frankly, administrative matters, they're policy matters. So we all have ownership of this.
So, then I have a question about our study sessions, which, and last week, Scott, Councilmember Corbin, you mentioned you would like to be able to have each of us, we're all on different committees, give a report or find out something about what you're on, and I would learn. And I wonder if we can do that, because we do have, I do think of our visions, and we are moving ahead despite this being everything's a little bit dated. So it would be nice to have that kind of thing, and the chance to, I never thought I would say I want more meetings, but, we kind of miss those dinners ahead of time, before these kind of meetings to talk about these kinds of things. Where are we? And it's somehow, even with this being a 2019 kind of thing, we have managed to move ahead with our visions of inclusion and, things are happening. And I would like to see that continue with, of course, climate change and energy, as well as diversity and affordable housing. And I always know that you will keep, and you and Tim for a while, Tim Vogley, will keep us financially on track. I don't worry about that.
So I'm going to turn that to the mayor
Yeah.
as far as how you make use of your time.
Yeah, and exactly. And there is, please remember, there is a spot on the agenda every single regular meeting for council members to communicate to the rest of council what's going on. I'm a little bit hesitant to have a point in the agenda where we each go and give a report, or are expected to give a report every meeting about what's going on the particular boards or committee or commissions that we're on.
Sure.
But there is that opportunity that if there's information that you want to share with the entire council, that's there every single meeting to be able to do that.
And maybe we could, maybe we don't want written work, but maybe we could just send something via email. I don't know. It's kind of nice to know what's going on and
Yeah.
all the.
And I think we're all free to do that as long as we're staying within the bounds of the Open Meetings Act. That's the only other concern that we want to make sure that we're aware of when we're doing any of that communication, which is why it's nice in the regular meeting to be able to have that time to be able to do it, because it is a regular meeting.
Okay.
in a
Our
posted
recording
regular meeting.
Commission is supposed to be submitting minutes also, so
Yeah.
that, you know, that's another resource to be able to go.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I'm not that interested in recreating the minutes of the planning commission meeting if it's already been,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
if it's already been done.
True.
Any other questions, comments for Keith?
I will say for those of you that haven't, don't sneak out. You have your choice of safety mask wear, so come see me afterwards.
Great, thank you very much. With that, I believe we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks to everyone.